Alec MacGillis, who's a writer for Slate.com, who had a provocative piece on the website this week called Why St. Louis Should Move to Illinois. Leave Missouri and move to Illinois. Alec, welcome to the Big 550.
Well, thanks for having me.
I'm going to let you just make your case here. Why should the city of St. Louis no longer be in the state of Missouri?
Well, the case is that the city's just not being served very well anymore by being in a state that is otherwise, except for its two big cities, has become so red and so conservative. The gap has just grown politically between the cities and the rest of the state these last few years, and it's just not helping the city. I cite two examples in the piece of areas where this has become a real problem. One of them is gun laws. I was astounded to find out that that in St. Louis, that when the police pull over a car that's got some guys driving around with loaded guns, that they can't necessarily do anything about it. And the other example is Medicaid expansion. That that Medicaid expansion, of course, is not happening in Missouri, and that's hurt a lot of people in St. Louis.
One of the things that is a absolute fact is that St. Louis and Kansas City and Columbia, which is the home of the University of Missouri and a more liberal bent, the middle of the state, those three have absolutely been by the other parts of the state, and their influence has waned as their population has dropped over the years.
Exactly.
But if you move just the city of St. Louis, what about all the people who are in St. Louis County adjacent?
So I addressed that in the piece, and and of course this is all hypothetical that we're talking about here. This is not about to happen. But what I suggest in the piece is that you could conceivably move part of St. Louis County, the northern and central part of the county that is more diverse, more Democratic leaning, and leave the southern and western parts of the county with the state of Missouri. I'm well aware that the whole issue of the city-county lines is itself a very thorny one in St. Louis. And heck, Jonathan Franzen wrote a whole novel about it, just the whole issue of where that line should be between the city and the county.
Yep.
So I have a question. Where do you live?
I live in Baltimore.
Okay, so what made you think of St. Louis? You know what? I want to write an article of moving St. Louis to a different state, to a neighboring state.
That's a fair question. I've reported in St. Louis on occasion over the years. I really like the city a lot and have real fondness for it. And so, and then when I saw this, it was this piece in the New York Times last week about the homicide problem in St. Louis and how the rate jumped up last year. And they had this mention of the gun laws and the fact that under Missouri state law, you can have a loaded gun in the car without a permit, which makes sense out in the rural areas. It's basically intended for a guy driving around with a shotgun or rifle in his pickup, and it's okay if you don't have a permit for that gun out there in the country. But in the city, it's been a real problem because again, the police will often pull over a car with a couple of young guys, maybe gang members or whatever, felons, including guys who have records. But there's a loaded gun or two in the car, and they can't necessarily take the gun or bring the guys in for having the gun because under state law, as long as there's one guy in the car who's not a felon and who can sort of claim that, oh yeah, that gun's mine, it's not the other guy's, they got to let the car go, and that just seems crazy to me, and it just seems like such a mismatch between what the city's needs and the state law.
How do you think that would change if we didn't have the right to carry a weapon in the car? Do you think people who, by the way, aren't going to get permits to begin with are going to change their ways?
They're not going to change their ways, but you can grab them when you come upon them. That's the whole thing. No, they're not necessarily going to go out and get a permit. That's the whole point. That if the police then come upon this that situation in a traffic stop, they are able to. In other cities, they can do something in that instance. Other cities, one way that other cities have managed to bring their homicide rate down, while St. Louis has remained pretty high, is that they're able to get the guns off the street in an instance like that.
What about in other red states, particularly those in the Deep South?
Right.
where you have a city that is mostly blue, but everything around it is mostly red. Think of New Orleans in the heart of Louisiana, or Atlanta. A friend of mine moved there, and he said, Atlanta is great, but you're surrounded by Georgia.
Right.
Lots of other places. Memphis, Tennessee is blue, but the rest of Tennessee
exactly.
is
There are
deeply
lots of
red.
places that have this similar situation. The difference in St. Louis is in what sort of led me to throw out this kind of wild idea is that St. Louis is actually right on the edge of the state and right next to a blue state.
Yeah.
So the other ones, that's not the case.
Yeah, that's true. Memphis can't jump across to
Exactly.
Arkansas and
Okay.
change things all that much.
Right.
What about the economic impact?
Well, the economic impact, I got a whole lot of responses to this piece, and some people said, first of all, they said these Illinois might not even want St. Louis because St. Louis has got all sorts of urban problems.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to the state of Illinois and get the legislators in Springfield, and your pitch is going to be, hey, we have this area that has a really high homicide rate.
Right.
Why don't you make it part of your state?
Right. The argument for them accepting it is that cities, for all their urban difficulties, are economic engines. I mean, you have St. Louis, despite all of its years of population loss and whatnot, is still a major economic engine with great hospitals, universities, and all the rest. And Illinois, as we know, has been sort of sluggish economically.
Sluggish. They're running
years.
a huge deficit. They got
Oh, yeah.
major
Right.
money
Billions.
problems there.
Right. The city simply, it's just gotten to the point where for decades, of course, the city was in this state that was otherwise pretty fairly rural and fairly conservative, but it's just stunning how much that gap really has grown now. If you look at because of the as you mentioned, the population loss, the population movement, the shift toward a redder politics in the rest of the state, the shift toward bluer politics in St. Louis. We talk so much about the red-blue gap in the country between states, but what's really striking is just how much these gaps have grown within states, to the point where you have these places where the political incentives and political needs are just so starkly clashing.
We have a little problem here with our football team, the Rams, who are threatening to leave town, and I think they are going to leave town because they want their own stadium, and, the owner, who's already a billionaire, wants to be a triple billionaire. And so there's, people arguing about, well, the economic engine of a professional football team, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, the politicians bow down and try to do whatever they can to keep this because they consider it an economic engine, even though every study that's ever been done shows that it's not. But they believe that it is. If the politicians in Jefferson City believed that St. Louis was such an economic engine, would they consider changing the laws to fight to keep it in the state, do you think?
Well, that's the thing. Why can't that would be the more practical solution short of secession to problems like this? Why can't St. Louis get some more the ability to carve itself out, exempt itself from some of these laws, like the gun law that I mentioned? And there are areas where the city and Kansas City have been able to do things a little bit more their own way, more suitable to the urban context. Unfortunately, with the gun law, the politics of guns are so monolithic that they have not. The state has not been willing to grant the city the kind of exemption so that it would just have laws that make more sense for the problems that it's dealing with. But then you still are left with things like the Medicaid expansion. I mean, here you have just thousands of people in St. Louis and elsewhere in the state too who are not benefiting from this major part of the Affordable Care Act because the state just refuses to go along with the expansion. So, yeah, ideally there will be ways that the state could be simply more attuned to the needs of St. Louis and kind of let it do its thing. But that's not really happening right now.
Well, of the two major cities in Missouri, Kansas City is not the one that can threaten to move across the river because nobody wants to live in Kansas.
Exactly.
But the question of St. Louis moving to Illinois, not going to happen, but it's an intriguing idea, and I appreciate you coming on and talking about it today, Alec.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Alec MacGillis from Slate.com here on the Big 550 KTRS.